Hello and welcome to Crisis Intervention, Chapter 5. We will be covering developmental crises and some special issues related to adolescence in particular. So, we're going to start with a little bit of Erik Erikson, and we're going to talk about his developmental crises that he came up with that occur throughout the life cycle. And you can see it at every stage from infancy through adolescence. A lot of this you may have touched on in some of the counseling classes or developmental psych classes. So I'll do just kind of a quick review. But what Erikson believed is that through each uh, set of chronological years, there are also developmental stages that have to be mastered. And there are these crises that occur internally and externally that one needs to get through, and not just get through, but successfully get through. Elements of it that are not successfully achieved may go on to sort of be a developmental lag for the person as they age. So you'll see, for example, birth to 1 year, it would make sense that child is developing trust versus mistrust, and that is largely based on, of course, how the caregiver presents the environment and how they take care of them. And that spans through, if we talk about adolescence, identity versus identity confusion, trying to figure out who one is in the world around them, given both the internal structures that they have or how they see themselves versus the outer world. And then up and through uh, uh, older age, where there are discussions about or thoughts about looking at one's life, things that one is able to do or has done versus the sort of the autumn of life, the despair that may be happening. Family systems theory posits that the family behaves as one, that each part of the family is interdependent, meaning it relies heavily upon one another, and interconnected. Some assumptions would be from this family systems model that one change in one part of the family affects the entire family. The family as a whole is greater than the sum of its parts. They try to balance change and stability. Behaviors can be best explained in terms of circular causality. What comes around goes around. A family belongs to a larger social system and operates by established rules, their own rules. So crises do not necessarily mean danger here, but something significant and changing in the family, like illness, birth, job loss, new job, etc. Rules about how and when to interact with whom are also established by families. For example, there might be established rules in my family about timeouts. Um, like the older kids would love to give the younger kids timeouts, but that's not their job. A key concept in uh, family systems theory is that of homeostasis, seeking a balance in the family, a state of balance. So, for example, a family where the parents have been abusing drugs and become sober, the children who've been raising themselves don't like the rules and are now being enforced. That are now being enforced by their parents. So the children act out in an attempt to return to what it used to be like when they were in charge. However, the parents, well aware of this stress and its impact on their sobriety, decide to maintain order. They become more strict. So there's a constant search for stability. Homeostasis is vital for the system to maintain its rules, act to maintain the status quo. In a crisis, there requires an adjustment in behaviors, rules, or interaction in the family system. As one gets better, for example, in a family system, another may get ill. So this serves a function for the family. Birth of a sibling impacts the firstborn and how the parents interact with the firstborn. The firstborn loses the role of baby, gets promoted, many times unwillingly, into a big brother or big sister. There's a change in expectations, rules, interactions, and the system has to adapt to maintain stability. Uh, there's a difference between stability versus health. Stability or predictability doesn't necessarily mean healthy. And you can think of this when we talk about codependent relationships. So there are a number of family systems theory concepts, boundaries, um, and there are different kinds of boundaries. There are a variety of these things that I'll get into some examples here. Enmeshment, diffusion, disengagement, rigidity, and clear. So the enmeshment is when everyone is over involved with each other. There's no sense of being separate. They may even feel threatened by each other's growth or independent choices. Um, some use obligation or guilt or fear to keep the others in check. One person may feel they need permission from another, while the diminished partner's needs goes unvoiced and unmet. Partners are supposed to totally satisfy each other, so they spend all their time together and have very few of their own friends. They can't make decisions for themselves about everyday issues, and any type of privacy seems to be secretive, so family members have access to each other's personal papers, emails, correspondence, etc. That is enmeshed. Diffusion is when roles are not clear as to who is to do what. An example might be addicted parents who use children to fill their roles. Disengagement is when they are not too close emotionally or socially. And rigidity is when there are very rigid roles and responsibilities. And I suppose you can assume what clear boundaries means. Clear roles, whose job is what. Boundaries in a family system defines who's in this system, who's in the subsystem, subsystem being like siblings, grandparents, those are subsystems. Husband, wife, the couple, that's a subsystem. These regulate relationships and establish areas of privacy. So, four types of family boundaries. Closed system is when they have rigid boundaries with the outside world. An open system has more permeable boundaries, and a mesh system may have very diffuse and open interpersonal boundaries. And disengaged is a family system where one family members are not emotionally involved with another. I'll give you some examples here. See if this makes sense. So think of these as a continuum, right? On one side closed, the other side open, one side enmeshed, the other side disengaged. So I don't know if you know of David Koresh and the Branch Davidians out of Texas. So he was essentially like a cult leader out in Waco, Texas, and eventually ended up, I believe, killing himself and a number of the Branch Davidians. There was a fire set, and I think they may have drank some sort of poison. So this system, this cult system, is both closed in terms of allowing the outside world in, as well as enmeshed in terms of weakening individual autonomy, because David Koresh was sort of like the king of the group and would know everything that was going on. An open disengaged system might be a system, for example, where they allow the outside world in, but they're not even really connected to each other. So the kids may be having parties in the house with their friends, drinking in the basement, and the parents are home and they're fine with it, kind of thing. Or maybe even indifferent about it. Family isn't composed of subsystems. For example, parental, marital, child, or sibling. These can be organized around gender or power or age. And within a family system, there can be evolutional crises. So for example, marital subsystem could shift if they have a child. The parental subsystem could shift with the loss of a child, could shift as the child grows up and goes off to school. Sibling subsystems can change with the addition of another child. Grandparent subsystems change over time as well in terms of health and involvement. When we're talking about adolescence and crises, there is a struggle for autonomy, differentiating oneself, separating from the family, connecting with friends, and at the same time, the family has rules and boundaries that they have to maintain in order to continue to provide some healthy parenting and structure. Bullying, which only in the past probably 5 years or so has gotten more attention in schools, is when there is aggression behavior intended to cause distress or harm to another child. You see this quite a bit in school, particularly in middle school, drops off in high school. But bullying also occurs in the workplace too, so it's something to be mindful of um, with adults. Now we enter into the technology of things when we talk about cyberbullying. In 2017, there was a NPR report out of Johns Hopkins and some new research on adolescent depression, and they saw an increase in depression in teens, in particular girls. And girls seemed more vulnerable in comparison to others when it came to depression, um, in part through cyberbullying. With the added cultural pressure on diet and appearance, as well as social media having an increased impact on how one fits in, um, feeling left out or feeling judged, being ganged up upon, that sort of thing. In terms of intervention, some schools have developed school-wide climate that discourages bullying. I know my school that my kids go to had developed some things some few years ago, and it's actually pretty helpful. The administration really goes out of the way to encourage staff to get to know the kids and to be aware, um, so that they can feel comfortable talking about things, and also be aware of which kids might have difficulties with impulse control and aggression and anger. Um, So part of this has to do with checking out to see where the students stand with things, if there is bullying or to what extent it is the school, training the staff, having rules that are consistently adhered to, and discussing it in classes. It also includes integrating these prevention themes across the curriculum. There might be other ancillary services like individual and group counseling. Parents would be involved, and of course, teachers and staff to increase the knowledge of staff. We know that the bullied child can be more anxious, more depressed, grades will slip. They may avoid going places or doing certain things if they think that the bully will be there. And on the bully side of things, the parents must learn disciplinary steps to take, place the responsibility on the bully, not the victim, try to resolve the issue, keep dignity intact, and also at the same time, taking a look at what parenting practices are currently being implemented and seeing if that has an impact or not. Moving on to one of our subtopics, teen pregnancy. It's actually had a decrease um, since 2009. It's gone down quite a bit. And but the issue is that teen mothers tend to have higher rates of not having a high school degree or college degree, lower wage, higher medical issues, more likely to have medical issues, more likely to require public assistance or live in poverty. The risk factors are, of course, the daughter of a teen parent um, poses a specific risk factor for that child. Poverty is a risk factor, low self esteem, poor academic achievement, dating at an early age. Also, you'll see dating older men for a daughter of a teen parent. If they are minority status, then that increased risks. And also, this need for autonomy and attachment can be skewed. Some of the interventions include clinics and shelters, parental involvement, parenting classes, information about adoption or abortion if the parent is pregnant. But more importantly, I think really here in all this is to be non-judgmental. It would be real easy to tell a teenager what they did was wrong, and I'm sure they've heard it from other adults. But that sort of approach would certainly push them away from you as the human services worker. So this covers both homeless and runaways. Think about it from the perspective of individuation, and I also think about runaways as somebody who's running either away to something or running from something. And so those are the things, or maybe both. And some of those things are part of the evaluation. The risks, of course, are prostitution, pornography, human trafficking, drug use. These are kids who feel abandoned. They're looking for acceptance. Um, some of the some of the research out there on interviews with runaways found that half run away due to conflicts with parents. 80% are girls who've been physically or sexually abused. Some of the interventions used are shelters, brief crisis intervention, family. There are respite centers too. I think like Safe Haven, for example, will do like a brief respite. Child welfare may be involved, but their goal really is to get the kid back at home, try to work out something with the family, or find permanent residence. Of course, keeping an eye out for any sort of abuse, trying to work on communication skills. Also, there may be cultural differences. First and second generation folks here in the States, when there's a big conflict between the generations and cultures, it becomes pretty apparent. And also, sometimes these kids become parentified, sort of like raising themselves, raising their siblings. And so then when other adults come in and set rules, it throws them off quite a bit. So, moving quickly into another subtopic, which you can find out a lot more of this in the child adolescent mental health class, eating disorders. The vast majority of whom are female. In men, it's underreported more likely. You do find higher rates, though, in male athletes, especially ones where it focuses on weight class, for example, or a certain fit. Let's see. Oh, onset, about a third is between 11 and 15. So early adolescence is when you may see onset. So, in terms of symptoms of anorexia, intense fear of gaining weight, refusal to maintain nutrition, erroneous complaints about being fat. It's almost like delusional. When they look at themselves in the mirror, they see somebody who's fat. And then if you looked at them, you would not say that at all. There is a high lethality rate with anorexics. I mean, a really, wasting away syndrome, medical conditions that lead to all kinds of problems and early death. They have disturbance of body image. They have, as a diagnosis, you may see amenorrhea, which is the absence of periods. In particular, with anorexia, they look at three. And also, there is a denial of seriousness of the behavior. It almost feels like delusional. It's like this entrenched cognitive distortion about how they look and how they see themselves. It's perceptual. Bulimia nervosa is a little bit different here because they can look like normal weight and everything. They binge on high calorie foods. You may see purging, vomiting, and laxatives, over exercising, shame, guilt, self deprecation, and concealment. However, they're not like anorexics in the sense that they are losing weight. Usually, they will maintain an average weight, but these other behaviors certainly lead to a lower quality of life and a shortened life as well. Some of the causes, being emotionally reserved or cognitively inhibited. Um, there's a lack of routine or predictability. They avoid risk. They look for perfectionism. They have a negative self evaluation, maybe even a fear of becoming an adult. We're not entirely sure if there are hereditary factors, but it looks like there might be. And in terms of treatment, there's physician involvement, family involvement. It takes multiple types of physicians, so not just like a psychiatrist, but you need a nutritionist, perhaps, a dietitian. You need a few different folks involved in the treatment approach here. And you're focusing on cognitive distortions, where people think the way they do about themselves with very little evidence for it. All right, that's chapter 5.